Hello and welcome back to the Brain First Parenting podcast. I'm your host, Eileen Devine, and most of the time on this podcast, we talk about the brain, but you probably have also heard me refer to your child's unique neurobiology, which is more than just their brain. When I'm referring to neurobiology, I'm talking about their brain and also their nervous system. Now, this has direct relevance to the topic that we're going to dive deep into today, so I want to spend a moment making sure that you understand what I'm talking about when I refer to their unique neurobiology. So the brain and the nervous system, you can't really separate the two. The brain is a part of the nervous system. It's not this separate entity. But as I've found over the last dozen years or so, as I've helped parents and professionals learn about a child's unique neurobiology, it has proven to be helpful when we separate the two so that they can wrap their own brains around what we're talking about. So separating it into the brain and the nervous system and making sure we understand clearly what each of those does for us on a daily basis. Now, there's always a lot of overlap between the two. Again, they're not separate entities, but one place that I see the most overlap is when we are talking about one's window of tolerance, or from a cognitive skills perspective, their emotional regulation skills. I have come to believe that this is one of the most underappreciated things that our brain and our nervous systems does for us on a daily basis. Together, they help us emotionally regulate through disappointment and stressors and frustrations. They help us rise and fall with the stressors that life inevitably throws our way. They help us stay within our own unique window of tolerance. Now, if you're not familiar with the window of tolerance as a concept, it was originally developed by Dr. Dan Siegel, and it's used to describe the optimal zone of arousal for a person to function in everyday life. So arousal means the level of physiological and emotional activation in our nervous system. When a person is operating within this zone or within their window of tolerance, they can effectively manage and cope with their emotions. Now, what does this look like behaviorally? Well, if we are squarely in our window of tolerance, it means that we are calm and we are alert, we can think clearly, we can engage with others, we can process, we can integrate all of the sensory information that the world is throwing our way without becoming overwhelmed. We're able to learn and solve problems. It means that we can relate or we can be in relationship with other people. Essentially, it means that we feel safe at this physiological level and that our thinking brain is online. Sounds lovely, doesn't it? It is lovely when we're in our window of tolerance. It's where we all want to be. It's way, way, way less stressful to live life within our window of tolerance. There is no motivation needed to be in our window of tolerance. It's what we all desire. Now, when we're outside of our window of tolerance, there are behaviors that also reflect this. These are the defensive behaviors that we talk a lot about on this podcast. These behaviors that reflect us defending against what is unmanageable, what we don't have the skills or the capacity to manage. So these behaviors that show we are beyond that capacity, beyond our window of tolerance, are behaviors like irritability or sassiness, anxiety, anger, maybe panic. It could also be more of the withdrawal, the social isolation, shutting down behaviors like low motivation or exhaustion, fatigue, checking out. That is not where any of us want to be. We are not choosing to be out of our window of tolerance. It's very unpleasant, but it happens to us from time to time. It is part of the human experience. So how does this apply to kids who have neurobehavioral conditions? My guess is that you're already making some of these connections. If you have a child who lives with a neurobehavioral condition, that means that their brain works differently and they have a fragile nervous system. Because their brain works differently, they are lagging behind in cognitive skills in comparison to where you expect them to be, where society expects them to be at their chronological age. Emotional regulation skills is a really common skill set that these kids struggle with. And it's not their fault. It is directly related to their neurobehavioral condition and how their brain works differently. Now, these kids with neurobehavioral conditions also have fragile nervous systems. So what does this mean? It means that the window of tolerance that we were just talking about is likely super, super narrow. So life throws what we would consider a minor frustration, a minor disappointment, really not a big deal, right? Life throws that their way, and they are instantly thrown into fight or flight, into this dysregulated state. It's like 0 to 60, right? Their capacity to manage even the smallest of life's stressors is just so narrow. So while, as I mentioned, we all find ourselves outside of our window of tolerance from time to time, because that's just what it means to be human, the frequency by which this happens with kids like yours and mine, that it is much greater, and the intensity is much greater. The intensity of those defensive behaviors when it happens is much, much greater. Now, there's another added layer to this that I want to be sure to mention because it's super important. Your child's window of tolerance may be narrow on a good day. That might just be part of their neurobiology. But when they are in an environment that does not understand how their brain works differently and does not accommodate them for their lagging cognitive skills, they narrow the window of tolerance even further. So what it means is those defensive behaviors become more entrenched, more intense, the longer they experience this chronic stress. The other added layer to this is what we've talked about on this podcast before, and that's the chronic cognitive fatigue that so many of these kids experience. We have an entire podcast episode dedicated to this topic. It's episode 21. So if you've not listened to that yet, I'd really encourage you to go listen to it after you're done watching this, because it will dive deep into what it means to have a child whose brain gets tired really, really easily. When that cognitive fatigue sets in, what does it look like, and what does it mean for their window of tolerance? So when their brain is tired, their window of tolerance narrows even further. Punishment is not going to increase the capacity, right? Nor is reasoning with them or trying to get them to be logical. What their brain needs is rest. It needs time to recover. It needs even more support, even more accommodations. Okay, so speaking of accommodations, how do you accommodate lagging emotional regulation skills or this narrow window of tolerance for everyday, seemingly small life stressors, disappointments and frustrations? That's part of life. I'm guessing that's where your mind is going next, as it should. So the first essential piece is something I've said many, many times on this podcast. It is easier said than done, but it is very, very essential. It's always the first step. It is slowing ourselves down so that we can get some space between their distress, them being outside of their window of tolerance, their inability to emotionally regulate, and our very natural human visceral response to that. Getting some space so that we can be thoughtful about what we do next, so that we can see it for what it is. That this is about a skill deficit. This is about their fragile nervous system getting easily tipped over into dysregulation. It is about their narrow window of tolerance. Making that initial shift in our mind, it shifts our energy. It softens us. It allows space for curiosity. It helps us be empathetic in the midst of their great distress, right? So the next step, it's really a simultaneous step, is to manage our own internal arousal, our own internal energy. What's happening within you? Are you firmly within your own window of tolerance? Are you grounded in your body? Are you regulated? What might you need to do in that moment to soothe your own nervous system, to remain regulated? This is always an important step, but when we're talking about how to support and build lagging emotional regulation skills, specifically in our complex kids who struggle, it truly is everything. It's everything when we understand that emotional regulation skills are not built in isolation. They are cultivated in relationship with another regulated person. So let me say that again because it's super important. Emotional regulation skills are strengthened through co-regulation, which is connection with another regulated person. Being in connection with a regulated person steadies and strengthens our own nervous system, including, most especially, when it comes to your child who's very, very fragile in this way. What does not work to build their emotional regulation skills is to isolate them, telling them to go calm down on their own, or to talk at them, or try to reason with them, or get them to see your logic. Remember, if they're outside their window of tolerance because of how distressing the situation is for them, they're also out of their thinking brain. They cannot reason, they cannot logic, they cannot listen, they can't reflect, right? When that's the case, they don't have access to those cognitive skills that are required to do those things. Supporting their fragile nervous system with regulated presence is first and foremost. That is what helps build those emotional regulation skills. Other accommodations that I'd encourage you to consider might be getting clear on the patterns. Where does your child experience that disappointment or that frustration that they can't tolerate, they cannot manage independently on their own? And how can you proactively plan to reduce that distress for them even just a little bit? For example, giving them lots of information about what's coming next and what to expect, so they don't experience what I call this whiplash effect, right? So say they're going to a birthday party, they're super excited about it, and you're talking to them way in advance of the party about how it might feel for them to watch their friend, the birthday friend, get all the attention, open presents in front of them when they don't have presents of their own. You're helping them imagine in that. You're anticipating that this might be a disappointment that they might have a hard time tolerating. So you're giving them the time and the space to be able to work through that emotion, to give them a better chance of being able to manage it in the moment because they're not experiencing the whiplash effect of it. Making sure that they are well fed and hydrated when you know they're about to enter into a situation that will test their window of tolerance. That's also a great and effective accommodation. Another might be really making sure that you are fully accommodating them with tasks that on the surface seem really manageable, especially for their chronological age. But when you scratch the surface just a little bit, you can see like, okay, this is minor to me, a small deal to me, but man, it tips them into dysregulation really, really fast. So an example of that comes up for me in my own parenting is with my 16-year-old, and I offer to tie her shoelaces every morning before school. That is something that seems very, very simple on the surface, especially for a teenager, right? But I know the pattern has shown me that it is a potential tipping point for her because of the fine motor skills that it requires, and she's anticipating school. That alone takes a lot of emotional regulation. So I offer to take it off her plate for her. I just do it for her every morning. So it's a moment in her day, but these moments add up, right? And they make a really big difference in terms of her capacity and her ability to stay regulated. The last one, let's not forget the powerful accommodation of using playfulness and humor. When you see your child's emotional regulation skills are starting to get the best of them, can you use silliness or humor or play to help them come back into their window of tolerance? It's such a great tool. It's like magic if you're able to cultivate it. those are just a few ideas. I hope they are helpful in getting you started in thinking about your child's own unique neurobiology, their brain and their nervous system, and how it applies to their ability or their inability to emotionally regulate. Looking for signs that their window of tolerance is likely very, very narrow. When does that trip them up? And how can you proactively support them in that to help build their capacity and build their skills over time? Okay, our next episode, we are going to continue on this topic, but we are going to be taking a look at our own window of tolerance as parents, as providers. It is such an important piece for us to understand in this big puzzle. So I'm really excited to cover that in the next episode with you. So stay tuned for part 2. And until then, thanks for listening in and take care.